Good morning, everyone. My name is Dawn Dole, and I'm the Executive Director for the Taos Institute. I want to welcome you to this dialogue with the author, and we're happy to welcome today William Madsen, Bill Madsen, to talk about his article. And this is a series of free webinars that the Taos Institute offers a couple times a year, where we invite an author to come and share a bit about their work and participate with you in conversations around their work. The Taos Institute is a community of scholars and practitioners. We work with social processes essential for the construction of reason, knowledge, and human value. We're a nonprofit educational organization, and we have all kinds of different programs, from a PhD program to a diploma program to workshops and conferences and online offerings. We have a relational research network. So all of you are welcome to come and participate in any of our programs, and we work really in a multidisciplinary way with organizations and people working in different arenas, from community work to organizational change work to mental health and social work counseling, education, community building, gerontology, healthcare. So all are welcome to participate in the conversation. And we work from the lens of social construction and how we work in the world and look at practices that make a difference through our social and relational practices. So today, with our dialogue series with the author, we welcome Bill. He's the founder and director of the Family Centered Services Project in Massachusetts. This service project supports the development of family-centered philosophy and practice through training, organizational consulting, coaching, and technical assistance. He works with appreciative inquiry in communities and organizations. He's known internationally and consults with organizations around the world using collaborative approaches to helping enhance the organizational readiness to embrace family-centered work. And he's written numerous articles and books. And today we've got Bill with us to talk about his article, Narrative Approaches to Organizational Development, a case study of implementation of collaborative helping. And this was published in the Journal of Family Process in 2016. So welcome, Bill, and I think we'll be planning to be together on this call for about an hour and a half. And we've got a nice small group so we can really be in dialogue with Bill, and thank you all for being a part of this.
All right, so first of all, can people hear me okay? Like, you could just nod, yeah or no. It's lovely to be here. My apologies for the family emergency that pulled me away from you guys 2 weeks ago. Let me start by just introducing myself, and then I want to get some introductions of you guys, and I will try to go back and forth between putting up something on PowerPoint and just talking. And Dawn, you will help me like keep my act together about this, I hope. So me, I'm a family therapist. Do a lot of work with families, and I also do a lot of writing and teaching. And I have, for years now, been kind of a boundary spanner, like straddling this world between the down and dirty world of frontline practice and the more esoteric world of family therapy theory, and particularly post-structural theory. And I think that they have a lot to contribute to each other. These worlds of lived and learned knowledge could really enrich each other. And I've been basically spending my life trying to bring them together in some kind of mutual dialogue. So let me just say a few things about that to situate myself. Much of my work has been helping practitioners developing ways of being available to families that assist them and myself to ground our work in a spirit of respect, connection, curiosity, and hope. So I wrote this book in '99, and then a second edition in 2007, Collaborative Therapy with Multi-Stress Families, which was basically an attempt to make a lot of post-structural ideas more accessible and relevant to frontline practice, and to ground it in everyday common language. And it seemed to have some sort of resonance for people. And I found myself in this position of people saying, yeah, this is really cool stuff, but then I go back to my workplace and I can't really do it because my workplace has all of these restrictions, which led me to develop this project, Family-Centered Services Project, which was an attempt to move from, so all of this occurred within a broader rubric of family-centered services, which is sort of what the phrase was in the US. So to move from developing family-centered workers to developing family-centered agencies, and to move from doing just training to doing more organizational development. And that's been some of the most exciting and exasperating work of my life, because the broader context is tough. In the course of that, I then wrote this book about collaborative helping, which was essentially an attempt to offer a generic practice framework. So if collaborative therapy with multi-stressed families was an attempt to move from describing people as multi-problem families to multi-stressed families, the collaborative helping book was an attempt to broaden helping efforts from a narrowly defined and pretty much contained within a class-based system of psychiatrists, psychologists, social workers, blah, 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 and then way down at the bottom, caseworkers, which I think is an unfortunate name, because I think the work they do is much bigger than that. And so that was an effort to try to kind of tweak the class system of mental health efforts, social service efforts, and write a book that was really developed from the ground up based on interviews with really good, often non-credentialed helpers that pretty much just involved asking them, what for you is at the heart of good helping? How do you put that into practice? What challenges do you run into? How do you respond to those challenges? And what might be the lessons for our field? And so what I want to talk today about is, how do we build organizational contexts that would allow more respectful and responsive ways of interacting with families. But that's probably more than you wanted to know about me. So here's what I would like to know about you. All right, so now, see if I can get to this. Share. All right, so maybe if we could just do kind of a quick go round in the spirit of contact before content, like, who are you, where are you from, what's your work context, and very briefly, what led you to be interested in this conversation today?
And just to add to that, if we can keep this brief,
yeah,
it's not a 5-minute introduction of your work. It's a 1 or 2 minutes.
So if we were sitting in a room together, we could just do a simple go round. But given that we're all looking at computers, it's hard to know how you're arranged with each other. So
I can go down my list that I have here. So let's start with Chris.
Hi. First of all, I should say I've just discovered this pressing the spacebar method of unmuting the mic. That's really good. You just keep your finger on it while you're speaking and then let go and it mutes you automatically. So,
Nice.
but you have to set it before you join or go back to settings. And I'm Chris Blanton. I live in Scotland. My work is OD, Organisation Development, Organisational Learning. I'm semi-retired now, so I have the luxury of looking back at my work with a certain critical gaze. I'm very cynical about OD. I know Bill from years and years ago, and I was interested in the paper because of the overlap with OD. But also, I see a lot in common in Bill's paper with his description of practices, with a lot of the work that I've been doing, particularly with action research and forms of action research like action learning, which has always been big in the UK for the last 60 years, really, and large group interventions like Future Search. So I'm interested in just talking about some of the overlaps. I know that OD is borrowed from family therapy quite extensively as well, so there's a lot in common.
Thanks, Chris. So Dawn, next.
Next is Denise. Denise, let's see. Well, I'm not sure. I'll unmute you. There you go, Denise. You can speak now. We're just saying name, where you are in the world, a little bit about your work, and what drew you to this call. Okay, I'm not sure. She doesn't have a camera, but we're not hearing you either. We can come back to you, Denise. How about Monica? Okay, I unmuted you, Monica. Okay, that's not working either. Nellie. Nellie, I just unmuted you. You can take a minute to introduce yourself?
Yeah, let me introduce myself. Let me introduce
also,
myself.
Nellie, before you start, do you have a way to move your computer screen towards your face a little bit more so we can see?
Can you see me? Are you seeing me?
I see the top of your head.
Your forehead. Really nice forehead, but
maybe my sitting position today, my dear.
or move your screen, if you can move your screen a little bit.
Ah, okay.
That's better.
That's better?
Yeah.
Thank you. My name is Nelly Dirango from Kenya. My organization is Chemo Wellness Foundation. I'm one of the co-founders of the organization and also currently possessing the position of the CEO. Why we are interested with me and my team, why we are interested in the conversation. We would want to develop this organization, and especially so that we do a lot of activities with the youth and the community. Currently, we are embarked in peace building in Kenya. As many people have realized that when you read in the world news of Kenya, there's a lot of conflict among the ethnic groups that are living together. And the point of concern for Chemo team, we are looking forward to researching why after every 5 years, there's violence in Kenya, after every 5 periods of elections. And especially so, our main concern is about the youth who have been lured by politicians and rich people who are actually taking charge and providing some money so that the Kenyans can destroy the country. So for now, I think that is the match I would want to give. Thank you, Dawn.
Great. Thank you, Nellie.
Thank you.
Next is Tahara.
Hello, this is Tahara Barati from Toronto, Canada. I live in Toronto. I have been living in the past 20 years. I have been doing marriage and family therapy because by training I'm a marriage and family therapist. I'm familiar with narrative and collaborative ideas, and I have been practicing and following your books and articles, Bill, for the past 20 years. And I'm very excited to be part of this conversation because I always look for new tweaks.
Sarah, where is it in Toronto that you're working?
I used to work for the Children's Mental Health Agency. Recently, I quit and resigned my job, and I moved to private practice. So now I'm in private practice, and I do couples and family therapy. And it's yeah, and the reason I'm here is just because I'm always looking for new tweaks and new ideas and creative ideas about how we could actually do the old ideas in a new way. And collaborative narrative ideas have been around for a while, and I like to see this new class formation that you are designing in terms of how we could actually start from bottom up to rebuild organizations, because that was the reason I left the organization, because it wasn't helpful and constructive to me.
Yeah.
Stifling. Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Back to you, Don.
Tatiana, do you want to go?
Hi, I'm Tatiana. I come from Mallorca, Spain. I'm working at the University of the Balearic Islands, and I'm doing my PhD about collaborative framework with families in special distress. And I'm really interested in this conversation of today because I would like to implement some ideas in the future in the agencies that work with families in social services. So maybe I can have some ideas from this conversation. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And then Thad?
Hey everyone, I'm Thad Mantero. I'm the Director of the Health and Wellbeing Initiative at Texas Women's University. I'm a counselor by training, and I worked for a number of years in a clinical setting with folks with addictions. I think that this work would have been really helpful to me at that time. I think I'm really drawn to this because I oversee a comprehensive institution-wide health and wellbeing initiative that's designed to help students be healthier and more successful. But it means bringing together a lot of different stakeholders. And I'm looking for tools. You know, this phrase, collaborative approaches to assist organizational readiness, really speaks to me. I'm looking for ways to build the organizational context that helps people work together to serve students in a really respectful way. It's like Tahira said, I'm really looking for new approaches, new ideas. I'm really interested in the PhD program through the Taos Institute. But I'm looking for some new ways to make more vital the work that we do together. Thank you.
Great, thanks. And I think that's it, Bill.
All right, so let me go back to putting something up here. Sort of weird how this keeps. All right, here are my hopes for today. What I want to do is lay out some material, take about a half hour to just put out some starter dough for us to talk about, and then move from there into questions that you and I might have about reflecting on this, responding to this, have a conversation about those questions, and then figure out where we might go from there. So, this book that I mentioned, Collaborative Helping, a central piece of it has been the development of these collaborative helping maps, which are very simple maps designed to provide a structure to help workers think their way through complicated situations and organize conversations with families. So it's basically 4 questions. Sort of hopes and visions. Where do you want to be headed in your life? What gets in the way of that? What contributes to that? how can we draw on supports to address obstacles to get to vision? So it's sort of a mix of appreciative inquiry and narrative ideas, particularly in terms of thinking about externalizing obstacles. Like how can we describe obstacles in ways that separate them from people, and how can we describe supports in ways that connect to people's agency. So people have found those maps pretty helpful, and much of my more recent work has been focusing on how can we institute that, how can we institutionalize that in ways that build it into the fabric of organizational cultures. And that leads me into saying a little bit about the work of Charles Glsen, who has done a lot about organizational climate and outcomes for families. So I want to highlight two studies that he did. First was a 3-year study of 250 children in public service offices throughout Tennessee, where he found that organizational climate, in particular low conflict, cooperation between workers, role clarity, and personal relationships, was the primary predictor of positive service outcomes and a significant predictor of service quality. So, you know, funders are often on this whole hunt for what's the newest best practice that leads to good outcomes for families. And one of the things that I've been playing with this is if we were to say that the way in which workers are treated in organizations is a primary predictor of good outcomes for kids, wouldn't it be really interesting if funders basically said, if you treat workers well, we will fund you, and if not, you're out of luck. Second piece, Glsen did a nationwide study of 100 mental health clinics in half the states in the US, and found that organizations with strong organizational climates and cultures had half the employee turnover and sustained new programs for twice as long as organizations with weaker climates and cultures. And what he meant by strong organizational cultures was expectations for workers who had input into management decisions, had discretion and flexibility to do their work, and were encouraged to seek out new and innovative ways of working. That they had a clear sense of how they fit in the organization, a sense of support in their work, and buffers against work overload and emotional exhaustion. So this is kind of a trifecta, right? Like good organizational climates and cultures have profound effects on workers, have good effects on services to families, and actually save money. Like turnover in services is highlighted as the cost of turnovers is 40 to 30%. Hang on. Oh, wait. Cost of turnover is 40 to 70% of an annual salary. So if you can cut that in half, that's a huge cost savings. So if we think about building strong organizational cultures as having good effects on kids, on families, on workers, and on organizations' bottom lines, how do we go about doing that? So we can think about organizational cultures as shaping interactions among people, and those organizational interactions shaping the organizational culture, which leads to the current climate in public services about what we're interacting with, right? So I think public services in general and child welfare in particular occurs against a backdrop of urgency, blame, and defensive practice. So just for fun, here's some slides about that. Look familiar? Right? I think anyone working in public services would describe their work as it's just getting quicker and quicker and weirder, and I got no time to think about my work. So urgency, blame. I think child welfare in particular, public services in general, operate within this culture in which families feel blamed by workers, workers feel blamed by supervisors, supervisors feel blamed by managers, managers feel blamed by the legislature and the press. And for me, this is not like laying the blame for this on any particular person, but it's just an organizational culture thing. And it leads to defensive practice, or what workers describe as cover your butt. So in that context, any introduction of new ways of working are often described as rollouts, which I think is more commonly perceived as rollovers. So if you think back to the first Indiana Jones movie of him running away with this huge boulder rolling down after him, I think that in many ways captures frontline workers' experience of rollout of new practice models as rollover. And in that context, I think it, maybe I have a slide here. Yeah, that implementation of new practices are often seen as corrective instruction, right? And I've often been in this situation of coming in and saying, here's some cool ideas, and people looking at me like, oh yeah, you're the guy who's going to set us straight. Good luck with that, man. And in the midst, like physiologically, in the midst of a fight or flight response, it's really hard to cultivate critical thinking and to open that up for people. And I think it requires an organizational culture that's grounded in a spirit of reflection, appreciation, and shared learning. And so what I want to do very quickly is just refer back to this article and lay out kind of a 3-point components of a collaborative consultation approach. I'm assuming you guys read this article, right? Yeah, you can nod or like, no, I didn't have time. So for me, the important pieces of this has been what we've referred to as stories from the field. Oftentimes I will get invited into organizations to provide training. And I think training's pretty limited. I'll say more about that in a moment. And to the extent that I can, I would like to move as quickly as possible to collecting up stories of best existing practices. So I gave, in the article, I give an example of in a residential program, practices of, what was it? Uncommon courtesy. What somebody at one point referred to as, well, I think what we're talking about here is this common courtesy. And a woman who is a 20-year veteran of working in residential programs said, nah, I think what we're talking about here is uncommon courtesy. So another example of that would be an organization north of Toronto that had me come out and do some training. And I was talking about this whole idea of mattering and marginalization. Like, how do we engage families, and particularly parents, in ways that they feel honored, acknowledged, and welcomed, and experience themselves as people who have significant influence and are active participants in our helping efforts. And this agency totally loved it, said, we want to become a mattering agency, which led to me doing a series of 2-hour appreciative inquiry meetings throughout the entire organization, right? Not just the clinical programs, but like the janitorial staff, the human resources, the electric, the internet people, the leadership, the board of directors, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Which to me was really exciting to think about, like, really, if you're going to become a mattering organization, how do you build it into the tapestry of organizational culture? So that's the first piece. The second piece is clinical training and coaching. I think training is often seen as a common solution to many problems, right? Like, I've got this PowerPoint, I may as well use it. I'll get this off to you guys afterwards if you want. So training is often seen as a solution to many different organizational problems, but the research is not great, right? It suggests that only 10 to 13% of learning from traditional trainings actually transfer to the job. So I've thought about stand and deliver trainings more as an opportunity to just get people on the same page, develop common experience, to inspire people, to highlight some shared language, for ongoing coaching that can build on that. Because I think the coaching is like, how are you actually putting this into practice in your life, is really important. And then the third piece of this would be leadership and organizational consultation. And a lot of that for me has been very much organized by some of Margaret Wheatley's distinction between hero and host leadership. So if hero leadership is kind of the more traditional command and control approach, right? Leaders have the answers, they know what to do, and if we just tell workers what they should do, they will do it. And that could be juxtaposed with an approach that she refers to as host leadership, where we're thinking about leaders as having expertise in asking questions that help workers think their way through complex situations while also holding some bottom lines. And particularly in child welfare contexts, you know, there is such an emphasis on hero leadership, right? Like, you look to your leader for the answers, because if you take action, you might get fired. So it's much better to just lay it off on the person above you. Tell me what to do. I think it's stupid, but I'll do it because it covers my butt. And the idea of suggesting host leadership in that context is somewhat suicidal. So for me, I've kind of taken this approach of, on a continuum, like, what about hero leadership is compelling to you? What about host leadership is compelling to you? What about these two different approaches are supported in your context? And given that, on this continuum, where do you want to position yourself? All right, so then the last piece of all of this is, how do we build institutional structures that support collaborative practice? Like, how do we rethink administrative and clinical paperwork? Because quite frankly, most of our paperwork organizes us to ask questions that make it really hard to build collaborative relationships with people. How do we think about different kind of formats for clinical discussions? In particular, a lot of work that I've done is this idea of integrating a, quote, client voice. So we'll have a conversation about a family, and somebody will sit off to the side and listen to it as perhaps the mother in the family, and then afterwards be interviewed about what was it like to have us talk about you in this way, like what was helpful, what was not helpful. And that for me has been really, really powerful. Like it's completely changed the way in which people talk about families. How might we rethink staff and program evaluations? How might we rethink outcome measures? How might we build quality assurance efforts to support more respectful and responsive ways of interacting with families? So that's enough for me. Here's some questions that come up for me around this, right? Like, how do you engage organizations mired in a culture of urgency, blame, and defensive practice to consider new ways of working? What are some concrete steps towards building an organizational culture of reflection, appreciation, and shared learning that might support different ways of working? And how can we in a consulting role support the development of an internal infrastructure that can sustain an organizational culture? So it's a pretty small group. Here's what I would suggest. I need to go get some water. I'm going to walk out of the room, go get some water. You guys, can you just unmute yourself and start talking with each other about what I've been saying resonates for you and what questions come up for you. And I will return momentarily to join you. Does that work? All right, have at it.
You can also pose thoughts, questions, ideas in the chat, and we can read some of those out loud too.
Dawn, can you take the slide down so that we can see each other in?
Yeah, I was looking at doing that. I don't know if people want the questions or if it's more helpful just to take them down. Let's see.
Well, you can always put it back up.
Yep, I heard that. It's coming down.
Okay. There we go.
It's just the idea that it's easier to talk to each other when we can all see each other. For me, it is anyway. But,
and just for those who don't know, there's a feature on the Zoom platform. It's at the top. It's called Speaker View or Gallery View. If you click on that, and if you're on Gallery View, that means you can see everybody's face at the same time instead of just the person's who's speaking.
I'm just going to start because I recently left the organization and I have a very fresh ideas about what can be done for organization. But I appreciate your comments, Bill, because I experienced blamed and defensive practices firsthand. Not only clients experience it because their issues are not resolved, but the workers are disabled to help because there are this type of defensive practices are coming from top down. So I like the idea of going from bottom up, but at the same time, that's one of my reflection of what I did in my organization, that I tried to work with workers to create different kind of attitudes or the host position, you know, when they meet clients and they somehow act from that hosting position rather than, you know, trying to be hero or rescue or answer to the urgency. But somehow I felt like it didn't take us very far because the management were coming and keep redirecting us. This is not you're supposed to be doing. You're supposed to be doing this. And we found ourselves in this dilemma that if we take one step forward, which client, frankly, appreciated it and they told us this is what we need, but at the same time, we were bombarded from the management that this is not you supposed to be doing. And that somehow created a lot of difficulties in terms of how to find a medium solution to keep both happy. So it was very difficult in short time it responded, but I couldn't expand it for a long period of time because it was very exhausting and getting us to burnout, because we were fighting with two ends. We wanted to do good things for our clients and be collaborative and do the way that they wanted us to work with them. And from the management, it was something that, this is not what we want because we can't measure what you're doing. Your goals are too broad, or this is not what your job posting is about. It's job titles or responsibilities about. So it's a lot of restrictions were coming from top. And then we kind of thought maybe they need to change in order us to do what we want to do. And that definitely would made everybody withdraw from what they were doing. And I said, this is not working. What should we do? And everybody sat and just looked at each other. It was totally, dead end. So I don't know. I like the idea of, going back to the workers and figuring out what works and how they do. But if the management is not supportive of it, or they are not in the same loop, it's very difficult to do it. I think we have to flatten all these hierarchies that exist and somehow get everybody in a room and figure that, okay, how are we going to do it? How could we change this dynamic that exists? And that's very hard to break.
So I have a number of reactions to what you're saying, but I'll sort of hold them in a moment. And other thoughts, like what she listened to all this, what came up for you, what questions get raised for you, what would you like to talk about?
Can I just add something or build on what Tahira was saying? Because I think after, 30 years of working in OD, organizational learning in the UK, what we call the public sector, which is health and social care, there's been a political policy shift towards collaboration and participation of users in service design and decision making, in theory. And quite often it doesn't get past the theory, that the rhetoric is abundant when it comes to this is what we should be doing. And I've worked with service providers and institutions whose funders request or require that they involve users in service development in order to get funding. But they don't do it. They don't do it because they're either terrified of doing it. Turkeys don't vote for Christmas and all of that, or for Thanksgiving in your case. Or they simply don't know how to get past the rhetoric. They don't have the practices that will enact the aspirations of the rhetoric. And it's extremely difficult. So picking up on Tahira's point, after many, many years of experiencing that, and it's been around in the UK for at least 20 years in that form, and it's no better now than it was 20 years ago, in my view, is that I would always look for, I guess you could say, champions that are interested in getting people in the same room together, that are interested in trying out something a little bit different. And I don't talk too much about the theory of that, but the object is to try and provide, and I think you mentioned this in the paper, Bill, the object is to try and provide a satisfying experience for most of the stakeholders so they can build on it. And so that has been my approach over the years, and sometimes you need somebody in the organization who's got the confidence to hold that space in order to try it out.
Other thoughts?
I wanted to add to the Tahere said about when the managers say that when the manager says that they have to measure your job, your work. Yeah, I think that maybe we could work in a new measurement instruments that they could provide some objective data that could support our collaborative work. Do you know what I mean? Yeah, because I think that collaborative practices work and they are evidence-based practices, but maybe we just have to start to do that and then be accountable for our managers. Do you know what I mean? Just to demonstrate that these collaborative practices can be more effective than the normal neoliberal way that they used to do.
So here's a question I would like to put out to people. So I told you the beginning of this story about an organization that wanted to, a human service agency that wanted to become a mattering organization, right? And it was a pretty exciting project, right? Like they, the fact that they said, we want to include everybody, the IT folks, the human resource folks, the janitors, the, you know, everybody, and have you do appreciative inquiry focus groups with them about what are some of the ways in which they're mattering others. To me, that was, you know, I mean, it was like a dream of a lifetime in many ways. And there was a whole bunch of follow-up that was scheduled. Like, okay, that was in the summer, and then in the fall, we're going to do this and this and this and this and all this sort of cool stuff, and actually really put it into practice. And 2 months later, the executive director was fired by the board and was replaced by a guy who was completely non-relational and was all about just developing a business plan. And it was just about how do we get more billing units, right? Because the quality of a billing unit doesn't affect the price, right? You can do crap services and you get paid the same as if you do really, really good services. And so I'm, you know, I would love this to be just a happily ever after story, but it's not the world in which we're wandering. And I'm curious about how you all, and I've got, you know, I got had a conversation with a child welfare person who I really loved yesterday, who's the director of training for a statewide child welfare organization, who was saying, yeah, we've been told we can't talk about our practice model anymore. And what we need to be doing is engaging in critical thinking. And I said, well, how do you engage in critical thinking without having a framework that helps you think your way through things? He said, yeah, we can't talk about that. So if in public sector services, that's kind of the terrain, this whole idea of how can we introduce new ideas? How can, you know, like everything that Taos is about, how can we bring that into the world? How are you guys coping with all of that? Like, what challenges come up for you? How do you respond to them? What keeps you going?
Thad, I know you said you have to leave in a little bit. Why don't you jump in here and just share some thoughts or reflections on what we've talked about so far?
Well, I think I'm pretty moved by the folks who are in the trenches working with families and the description of how to engage consumers or people who they serve in real relational, shared, collaborative delineation of services. For me, at an operational level, my work is really administrative, and so I'm managing 60 plus people in a large institutional effort that I'm looking for tools that help with me with the organizational development. So I'm thinking about some of these kinds of questions, creating a community that, where mattering is the focus. I'm thinking about bringing tools from this to our students, doing appreciative inquiry groups with our students. We don't do that at all. It's very helpful. I'm just sorry I have to go. I didn't realize it was an hour and a half, and I think all the good stuff is going to happen in the next half hour. So I'm sorry to be leaving everyone. Thanks, Dawn. Thanks for giving me that chance.
Yeah, you're welcome, Thad. Thanks for being with us, and we are recording, so you can listen to the second half hour.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, and Thad, any ideas you might have about this, I would love to hear subsequently. So
I think if we go deep in a question around culture, our organizational cultures, and I've been in organization development work since the mid-'80s, not much has changed in terms of hierarchy and control and command kinds of organizations. And we keep talking about collaborative and full participation and all voices in the room, but making that happen out in the world beyond our academic spheres is very challenging. And when you find an organization that does work from a collaborative stance, from an all voices matter stance, it's refreshing and it's enlivening, and everyone that works there comes alive, and the work becomes just really meaningful for everybody. So it is a big question, and what if we go to the beginning of culture and how we create our organizations, what is causing the command and control kind of environment that our organizations are built around? Many organizations are built around. Where does it start? Does it start in education? Does it start, well, definitely it starts with relationship, and our large organizations have pockets of groups in relation with each other, but at a whole systemic level, how do you create that so that everyone can participate? I was just reading an introduction by David Cooperrider in Jackie Stavros's book on Conversations Worth Having, and David Cooperrider did the introduction, and he featured a case story about Visa, the merchant account, the credit card company Visa, and how their culture from the early days was everybody working together, everybody's got a voice, everybody's creative and comes up with new ideas. And there wasn't a whole lot of control around work groups and what they're working on. It was just free flowing, and they would come together for 3 days straight and just be in conversation with each other. And it took some getting used to, but it flipped the culture, and it became one of the most thriving organizations in the world. So I think if we can find those pockets of organizations that are doing this kind of work and living in that way, what can we study about them that can help other organizations make movements in that direction?
So Dawn, here's the thing that stands out for me in what you're saying. Taos and everything you've developed in many ways is a countercultural institution. And there is a way in which a number of us are kind of pushing this idea of there's a whole other way of operating in the world. And that's hard and requires, I think, community and support from others. And so that's why I keep coming back to this question of, so folks, what keeps you going? How do you do it?
My response to what Dawn has said and what you're saying, Bill, I mean, part of the difficulty is that the notion of hierarchy and command and control in the industrialized world is so naturalized that people think it's part of nature. We don't question it, or it is not questioned enough. It's just endemic, it's everywhere.
Yeah.
And although we can theorize about alternatives and we can come up with examples of collaborative practices, it's not sufficiently pervasive to give people the experience of alternatives. So when they talk about leadership and they talk about managing and they talk about organizing, even people who are, you know, there's a study, I can't remember who did it, but the extent to which it was about face saving, the extent to which people who are oppressed will go to the ends of the earth to save the face of the people who oppress them in organizations, rather than see them embarrassed. Such is our ways of colluding in being commanded and controlled. It's really, really difficult. And I can't help thinking that one of the things that we can do, I mean, is that it is to, in simple language and in simple examples, to provide many more cases where people can say, but there is an alternative. I'm familiar with an alternative. We did it in school. We did it in lower school. We did it in senior school. We did it in college. We did it in my first job. If there are more examples of that, then the conversations about how do we lead, how do we manage, can be a little bit broader. But in my experience, and like Dawn, I've been involved in OD since the 1980s, that we can hold conversations with people, but there a lot of senior managers, their enthusiasm for doing things differently, even if they can have good experiences, even if you can show them stats and outcomes, which, you know, they might get some kudos from, they find it really, really difficult to take the risk of doing it. And it's really difficult to introduce common or garden alternatives into the conversation. That all sounds a bit negative.
So do you have, do you have ideas about how you might do that? How we might do that?
Well, I've done it, but by not talking about it, actually, by saying, right, okay, we're going to tackle shared challenge, and this notion of holding on to the process but letting go of the content. So actually, in a way, being quite directive about the processes we might use. In the same way, I suppose, in a sense, Bill, you are being in your paper. Here are some good processes that will deliver something different. So there's a sense in which we hold on to the process and invite people, even seduce people into doing it differently, so that they can have the experience of something different without having to prove it with rhetoric first.
Yeah, I think the experience of it, I mean, there's nothing that beats the experience, right? Like if people have an experience of being a, quote, host leader rather than a hero leader, you know, like, that's much easier. It's much more rewarding. It's much nicer. And there's not a great alternative to that experience. But I don't know. Ladies, what do you think?
I'm thinking about several things, but I'm just going to start with the last statement you made, Bill. It's true, being a host leader is much more pleasant and it's more inclusive. But somehow, the discourses that we are living in are not acknowledging that knowledge. So they don't think that's actually there's any value or credit. They don't give credit to it. So, I mean, we build institutions that somehow you have to have certain qualifications. So let me tell you an example. We had a team meeting and we came up with the idea of chairing the meeting, you know, every month, you know, different person. So it's not just something that the manager should be doing. And everybody was started taking a role, preparing the meeting. And after several months, everybody stopped doing it. So when I asked what happened, so why we are not doing it? Wasn't a good experience? Didn't we like it? Didn't you feel we're part of a group and we are contributing it? They said, why should we do it? The managers are getting a lot of money. They are imposing us a lot of things. Why should we do their work? They should do their work. They are not lifting anything off of us. So I think it's the great, a lot of things are great and a lot of things people want to do it, but somehow there are other parts of this organizational cultures that somehow come and totally dismantle those glimpses of, you know, collaborations or working together. So to me, we can't talk about the power relations. We can't deconstruct the power relations that somehow governs everybody's interactions with each other in the organizational culture. And just jump in to do collaborative. I think these two work has to be done simultaneously. So managers need to have a different view of if someone else is chairing doesn't mean they're robbing their position. And workers needs to, you know, have this orientation that we are in it together. So this culture has to happen as we are tackling different pieces at the same time, but not everybody's up for it. So it's a hard work. It's true. The result is great, but it's a tough transition. And I think the reason Taos Institute has been great because the founders are very collaborative. They came with that mindset. So they were somehow, you know, guided by principles that wouldn't allow them to step outside of those principles, and somehow everybody followed and everybody somehow became became a collaborator. But I don't think the outside worlds have that kind of mindset, or traditionally we've been in this hierarchical
and to hear out, if you think about the Taos Institute in that way, and the founders, I absolutely agree with you. And what happens is when others come into the conversation or want to participate in the organization and share ideas for more control and more procedures and more, you know, more structure, the founders are constantly being challenged, and they constantly are reiterating the need for collaboration, the need for dialogue, the need for everyone's voice is important in this whole organization, in this whole process. So it's not easy to keep that kind of an organization going, because the outside world is constantly saying, you need more structure, you need more policies, you need procedures, you need blah, blah, blah. And they're like, no, we don't. Things come and go, and we work, and we're in relationship with each other, and it'll all be good, and it'll all happen. And so, I mean, there's a tension there.
And I think it's very hard for a lot of people to live with that tension, because, you know, at the end of the day, work is work and life is life, right? So that separation, it works against people as well. But with Taoists, it's different. Work and life are intertwined. I think a lot of pieces need to change in order for collaborative work to sustain itself. It's, you know, we initiated a lot and it just disappeared. I think it's hard. You need a village to keep all the pieces together. So otherwise, it's very difficult to do it alone.
You make an interesting point, Tahira. Work is work, life is life. I mean, I guess everybody here, we're all from nations, states that participating in.
Chris, can you repeat that? Your computer froze for a minute.
Right. I said we're from nations that invest heavily in democracy. We go to war to defend the spirit of democracy, it seems. Or at least that's what we're told. And yet in our workplaces, it's quite often anything but. We are schizophrenic in that sense as societies, that we can say how much we believe in people having a voice and democracy, and then we go through the doors of the workplace and it's upside down. It's completely different in a lot of cases, and it's paradoxical. It's really, really difficult to understand.
So here's the piece that comes up for me in all of this is finding ways to legitimize, legitimize inquiry, right? So here's a quick story about that. I was involved in this large-scale implementation project here in Massachusetts around wraparound work and services to poor kids. And at some point, the lead consultant asked me this question of, so Bill, when you're going out and doing home-based work and you like meet with families, like, what do you do with them? And I said, well, I mainly just ask them questions. And she said, no, really, what do you do with them? What is it you're actually doing? And I said, well, I'm mainly just asking them questions. And she asked me a third time, no, really, what do you do? And I thought, I'm really not quite sure how I can give you a better answer than what I've given you now. And said, well, this is going to be really frustrating, but I mainly just ask them questions. And she said, oh, give me a break. If that's all that was, anybody could do that. I could do that. And I kind of lost it and said, actually, no, you couldn't. I've spent 20 years developing this art of asking questions, and it has taken a lot of effort. At which point I realized probably not the best thing to be saying to the lead consultant if I want to keep having this consultation gig. So I got off the phone and said, okay, gotta go. I know you got other stuff to do. And she called me back the next day and said, Bill, I've seen you ask questions, and there is something about the way that you ask questions that is really powerful. Like, do you have a map for that? Or do you have like a framework for that organizes how you ask questions? And I thought, really? all the materials I've shared with you. You've not read any of that. But the more important piece is that it wasn't until I basically said, I am a freaking expert. And here's my expertise. My expertise is asking really good questions, that it somehow became legitimized. And I think this whole, like, I think there is this thing of real men have answers, not these wimpy questions. And somehow finding ways to legitimize inquiry as, and legitimize sort of host leadership as, that's legitimate leadership. It's, you know, it's like, you don't have to just have answers. You could have really good questions, and it might be more useful. And I don't know how we go about legitimizing that. I mean, do you guys have thoughts about that? Tatiana, you've been right, like that's.
I have a problem. I haven't.
So what do you think?
I have not understand the this word that you said, Jeremizing. What's that?
Wait, which word?
I cannot repeat it, but something like
legitimize, Bill. Legitimize.
Legitimize.
Nice. Okay. Oh, I was the whole conversation trying to get
Leading
in
by
that
asking
word.
questions is real leadership. Like, how do we put that idea out there?
Yeah. Okay.
What do you think?
Yeah.
I think that one thing you said, Bill, earlier was experience it.
Yeah.
You know, create those experiences for people as much as we can and they can, and organizations can, groups can. Yeah.
I think that's why, Bill, over years of doing OD, I turned to, I don't know how you feel about this, but I'm at the end of my career in that sense.
Yeah.
Unfortunately. I've ended up working with just a few things, methods and approaches, and trying to do them well rather than having, you know, lots and lots of tricks and tools. And those methods are all around action research. They're all around the art of asking questions. They're all around helping people to find themselves in positions of inquiry. So, for example, if you give people a camera in a workplace, they become inquirers. They cannot help but become inquirers. Invite people into processes like, well, appreciative inquiry. Well, appreciative inquiry is an approach, not necessarily a method. Like action research, forms of action research, large groups, small groups, and simply model and invite people into asking questions. And so less of the rhetoric, less of the theory for me, and more, let's tackle this issue using this method and be fairly robust about not enabling people to cherry pick the content of the method and saying, look, there's a process here, and inviting and helping people through it. And that's how I've ended up just doing a few things well, but primarily based on displacing command and control with the art of asking questions.
I think that the relational stance that professionals hold with the family really marks the difference. So, although, yeah, you are the expert, and I know what you mean when you say, yeah, I've been for 20 years working on doing some really good questions. I think that professionals that hold this relational stance as appreciative allies, that really respect the family and really want to doing this co-research with them, they get into a special climate that that help them to do these questions in a collaborative way. That's
All right, so we're coming closely to the end of all of this, and here's the question I would like to put out to you guys. As you think back over this conversation, what would you like to remember and carry away with you?
Yeah, for me, this idea that the organizational development could be this horizontal spread instead of this vertical roll-on had a lot of sense for me, because it's a way to, and this idea about there are some people that are really engaged, and there are this majority that are quite skeptical, and they are like, okay, let's wait and see. And I think that this could be really powerful to start in organizations that the management does not have this collaborative approach in their minds. So maybe starting with the professionals, just doing different kinds of things and different kinds of conversations with families that make maybe a difference. And then after some months doing that in a different way, that maybe it's like, hey, your families are working better than mine, tell me why. And maybe they can start to being engaged in somehow.
Thanks. So, Monica or Denise, you've been kind of quiet, and unfortunately I don't have a picture of you.
Bill, they're from Peru, and I'm not sure their microphones are working, so they can put something in the chat. So Monica and Denise, if you want to put some thoughts in the chat, we can read them.
Yeah. And in the meantime, Chris, Tahira, anything you want to take away from this?
I don't want to speak first.
There is a lot to take away from this. Considering my condition, there's a very fresh situation I'm in. I think the whole distinctions between hero and host leadership is going to stay with me. And the way I look at these two paradigms is that, hero leadership has a long-lasting traditions behind it. And host leadership is very new, it's very fresh, and it came somehow to the practice with your ideas and Harlan Anderson's ideas of not knowing and staying curious and, and taking this host position in relation to clients. Maybe we should give the public a little bit of time to digest these ideas. These are very new, and we can't reach the outcome that we desire because we are again in a culture that is driven by solutions and outcomes, and we are seeking solutions and we want to see the visible outcome. And I think maybe we do need to take a little bit of a step back and let some of these ideas to spread out and people to start experiencing these new positions. And maybe we could help them to take those positions, by asking them some questions and help them then experience it before expecting something drastic or large happen. I think everything starts with the small things. And I'm going to take these two notions with me, and I keep helping myself to re-experience it and also creating conditions for others to experience it.
Chris, anything you want to say?
Yeah.
I mean, anything more? You've said a lot, but anything more?
I know. So is that are you disciplining me, Bill? There?
No, I'm not disciplining you. I'm acknowledging you. I am
I'm not, have I said too much?
welcoming your contributions to all of this.
I think I acknowledge what other people have said about what they're taking away. And this, what I want to say, is also something to do with the stage of my career. And you and I have talked about this anyway. But I think in terms of the question you posed, how do we legitimize this? I mean, in lots of ways, Taos is such a rich collection of resources, people and outputs, products, books, seminars, groups, etc., etc. There's so much there. But one of the issues that's important for me is, as a practitioner, trying to do the things that you're talking about in my own field, which is how do we help cultures to change? How do we legitimize different ways of doing things along the lines that we're interested in? And you said this in your paper, it's tough. And it's sometimes very lonely sometimes. And as Tahira has found out, sometimes, I mean, I think people who do organizational learning are pretty much unemployable. That is, they can't work for organizations anymore because of where they've come to.
Yeah.
You know, so we end up, like Tahira, being a private practitioner. And it can be extremely lonely. And so I think what I'm taking away is the possibility of talking about maybe having some dedicated support groups where we meet on a regular basis and talk about those kinds of challenges, not the theories so much, not so much the practices that we can get from other places, but on what it's like to try and quite often to fail, but to learn from it and go again. That's what I'd be interested in taking away, and finding ways in which we can support each other to do that.
That's a great idea, Chris. Let's think about that, how we can create forums for bringing practitioners together that are kind of looking for a support system. Okay, we've got a chat here from Monica, and she says when she listens to this, the words she's taking away are looking at the collaborative work and the words respect to others, or respect of others, and then a real curiosity to know what they need in order to improve in their work setting. So those are the words she's taking away.
So, all right, so here's my kind of wrap-up statement. Monica, thank you for that. It resonates very deeply for me. And the thing that I would really like to take away from this is the courage to take a much stronger stance of, because this is happening at a particularly weird time in US history, with the judiciary history, hearings about Kavanaugh, but would be this. An assertion that real men may not have great answers, but have some particularly interesting questions. So, thank you guys. It's really nice to hang out with you and spend this time together, and look forward to more conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much, Bill, for being with us today and sharing your article, and thank you everyone for participating. Be on the lookout for another dialogue with the author. If you have a paper or a book you would like to maybe engage with us, let me know. I've got a few ideas for things coming up, so we're going to keep these conversations going throughout the year. And thank you everyone for being here.
Thank you. Thank you, Bill. If you come to Toronto, let me know. I'd like to see you.
I will. We'll be in touch.
Cool.
See you guys.
Thank you. Take care.
Everyone. Dawn, how can we keep that idea